Hi, I'm actor Ian Champion, and welcome to History of Horror Cinema, my personal podcast tour of the good, bad, and the ugly of horror movie history. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe. Ishiro Honda, the godfather of Godzilla. In 1954, Japanese director Ishiro Honda directed Gojira, their name for Godzilla, and gave birth to a much-loved and equally maligned horror subgenre, the Japanese monster movie. These films were largely built around tokusatsu, the Japanese word for the special filming of monster actors in suits marauding through practical scaled-down sets, and whilst they could seem crude compared to modern CGI effects, their artistry and production design were admirable. They were simply the most obvious attraction, though. As we shall see, this was a species of horror movie that in the early days was often far more than what was on the surface. Honda, the influential director of not just the first, but many of the later Godzilla sequels, had an illustrious career comprising 82 feature films, 46 of them as director. His body of work included many genres, and he had never intended to work in the monster arena, yet such was his success that it earned him an assured place in horror movie history. Ishiro Honda was born in 1911 in the Japanese mountain and river prefecture of Yamagata. As the youngest of 5 children, his birth in the Chinese Year of the Boar was significant in his parents' choice of name. The I of Ishiro taken from the Japanese word for boar, no, and Shiro meaning fourth son. In their charming community, Ishiro's father was chief priest at a local temple, while his mother was an assistant charcoal burner. The family worked the rich surrounding land for its plentiful produce of rice and vegetables. Ishiro's childhood shaped him in ways that were gentle and kind, rather than the hard-knocks upbringing associated with many ambitious people in the arts. He described his mother as a very patient person. He might well have benefited from a little extra indulgence as being the baby of the family. Similarly, the spiritual guidance practiced by his father meant there was no stern paternal rod used on him either. Nevertheless, whilst not being forged by adversity into the hard armor of competitiveness, he recalled being stubborn to a certain degree and will never compromise on a decision I have made, no matter what happens. A robust temperament would be of use to him. When he was 10, his family moved to Tokaido, a city suburb of Tokyo, where his country bumpkin accent was mercilessly mocked. He took it as graciously as he did the move away from the pastoral idyll of Yamagata. Honda certainly had some cultural catching up to do. He claimed that until his Tokaido period, he never even knew cinema existed. This may have had something to do with his father's religious code, which forbade its members exposure to the silver screen. Though Honda's baptism was a nondescript Hollywood silent western, he was immediately entranced by the medium and mused on what he would create if given the chance. Later in life, the origin of his decision to become a film director-storyteller was somewhat of a mystery to him. 2 anecdotes shed some light, though. One was remembering his father's enjoyment of him recounting the plots when he returned from a cinema visit. The other was an element particular to Japanese culture, the cinema narrator. These men would stand to one side of the screen and describe and bridge any narrative gaps for movie audiences, something that often enthralled Honda more than the film. They could even be compared to our era's DVD commentaries, as sometimes an expert guide would show the crowd the filmmaker's alternate ending and contextualize it. Such experiences could well have influenced Honda's enthusiasm for story weaving. As far as formal education in the industry went, Honda studied at the pioneering film major course at Japan University. This initially proved to be a bust, since the faculty, recruited from the actual film business, had no faith in class-based teaching of what they saw as solely hands-on learning. It did, however, provide him with a turning point in his future, through teaching Professor Iwao Mori, an executive by day at the fledgling film studio PCL, Photochemical Laboratories, who we will hear more about shortly. Mori's agenda was to use his class as a pipeline to recruit more staff into his firm. In 1933, Honda bypassed their entrance exam by personal invite from Mori to join the company's production department. Honda claimed that his queue jumping was due to a prediction he made to music critic Hiro Nakami that music would one day be considered vital in movies, a view Nakami favored enough to pass on to his friend Professor Mori. Honda's sincerity did more than get him a job. It also enhanced his later alliance with composer Akira Ifukuba, as we shall see. Honda worked the traditional route up the studio ladder from fourth assistant director upward for 18 years before helming his first studio project. The firm, who later became the famous Toho Studios, was slow to promote lower-ranked assistants to full directorship, as they were cannily aware that they had less control over them. A director was employed under an annually revised contract, rather than a longer one assigned to junior staff. Still, his progress introduced him to 2 lifelong relationships at work. Most delightful was his meeting with script supervisor Kimi Yamazuki, who became his wife, and Akira Kurosawa, a fellow assistant director who in the autumn of Honda's career would go on to employ him for his own world-renowned body of work. The 3 actually bonded together, sharing the same studio-owned apartment that housed all the new Toho hires. Kimi and Ishiro's love and mutual admiration blossomed amidst a passion all the housemates shared for the art of cinema. As it turned out, Honda's career was inhibited less by his bosses than the interruption of politics and full-scale war. He was drafted into the army in 1937 as part of the Japanese occupation of Manchuria against the Chinese. Although he lacked the temperament of a military hero, he proved to be a crack shot, earning a marksmanship medal for his rifle proficiency. While he was too naturally unassuming to challenge authority, there was a strong purpose burning in him. He remembered, "I had to go back home to work in the movie industry, otherwise there would have been no meaning to my life." He also had the survivor's instinct to embrace army discipline, as a way of avoiding what he felt was the tyrannical and unfair punishments dished out arbitrarily by superior officers. Such resolve served Honda well, as he was recalled into the forces twice more during World War II. It was in this period that possibly his most important creative partnership was formed, that would brand him as a future fantasy visionary. It was with his visual effects supremo, Eiji Tsuburaya, dubbed Japan's father of special effects. Peter Brothers' marvelously fulsome biography, Mushroom Clouds and Mushroom Men, details how, after flying school training, Tsuburaya entered the movie business and there soon made his mark as a cameraman with innovative camera moves, such as double exposures and an elevated crane, as well as using high and low angle camera placements. His fascination with effect work earned him the nickname Smoke, due to his fondness for using it to simulate on-screen clouds, fog, and mist. Like so many nascent pop stars who remember the shattering influence of seeing Elvis for the first time, it was the release of King Kong in 1933 that convinced Tsuburaya that special effects was to be his calling. In America, Ray Harryhausen was another future visual talent whose wonderment at Willis O'Brien's stop-motion brilliance was to decide his fate just the same. The Japanese film industry, though, was resistant to this aspect of filmmaking, somewhat sniffily preferring the real thing to the perceived lowbrow artistry of special effects recreation. Undeterred in his life path, Tsuburaya began work for the company that would later become world famous as Toho Studios. Originally named PCL, Photochemical Laboratories, it was set up in 1929 to provide laboratory processing and post-production to other studios. By 1932, PCL had ventured more into physical production, building 2 sound stages. By the time of King Kong's release, Ishiro Honda had joined the company, and their fully realized production house offshoot, Photochemical Laboratory Limited, had been formed to produce its first film, the musical comedy Intoxicated Life. From 1937 to 1943, there was a convoluted period in which several studios merged with one another till they eventually became what we now know as Toho Studios, a complex that became as world-renowned as the home of Kurosawa art house classics as monster movies. As World War II raged, Tsuburaya was building a great reputation for his hugely convincing scale model work on camera. He recreated The Day That Would Live in Infamy, the bombing of Hawaii's Pearl Harbor, for the movie The War at Sea from Hawaii to Malaysia in 1942, a feat so uncannily realistic that according to Peter Brothers, the footage is still co-opted for modern documentaries on the event to this day. No wonder that its imagery was burnt into Honda's mind when they first began working together. He had seen this film upon release and was astounded enough by the effect's realism that it was only natural that Tsuburaya's talent would affect the course of Honda's creative choices into a realm that would make them both famous. Ishiro Honda respected and valued Tsuburaya's effects work so much that he left him completely alone to craft his side of a movie, never challenging his judgment. Tsuburaya was known for his painstaking methods. His assistant Koichi Kawakita recalled, as a filmmaker, he was always working to fulfill the dreams of children. He took that responsibility seriously and was very strict about everything he did. There were other key collaborators with whom Honda formed long-lasting professional relationships, which speaks to his ability to find shared harmony and values within his team. Hajime Koizumi was his long-standing director of cinematography. This is possibly the most vital creative partnership a director can have on set, since they are the ones responsible for interpreting the director's vision of what the audience actually sees. Similarly, the writer is a major component, as a film's success so often comes down to the source material of the text. Honda was shrewd enough to develop long-term bonds with two screenwriters whose styles he used according to the movie's tone. Takeshi Kimura was given projects that dealt with politics or a cynical tone, whereas Shinichi Sezekawa was handed films that needed an upbeat, or as Honda put it, an even childish feel. This must have come in handy in later years when Toho gradually caved to commercial pressure and controversially skewed to a more youthful audience. Another notable factor in the impact of Godzilla is the memorably stirring score by Akira Ifukuba, an earworm of surging martial scope to match the epic images on screen. The product of a poor rural background, by necessity Ifukuba was a self-taught musician, but later became a music professor at Tokyo University. As with Tsuburaya, Honda's respect for Ifukuba gave him carte blanche to compose his music. Over 18 years, he scored 17 of Honda's films, which proves, as Honda said, that his music has been indispensable for my movies. It wasn't just Ifukuba's talent that was so invaluable, it was also his speed. Typically, he was given just 4 days for composition, then 2 days to record the orchestra. Honda was fascinated by his methods and would often sit in on the recording sessions to enjoy how sound and picture finally came together. One more notable member of the Honda team who would make his monster movies and Godzilla especially memorable was actor Haruo Nakajima, who inhabited the creature suits in what has variously been dubbed tokusatsu, suitmation, and even costumation. Whatever name is used, there is no forgetting the personality who literally was Godzilla on screen. And so, with the major elements in place, we can now brace ourselves for the appearance of Gojira himself. Stay tuned. Sound the coastal warning alarm. He's coming in the next episode. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe.